Hi guys, Ramsey here. Today I have a very special video for you, and I'm not just saying that. I really feel that this is a special video. As a frag head, this is the kind of content that would just draw me in like a moth to the flame. And it's going to be a comparison video, but it's going to be a very special comparison video. And this is not me tooting my horn. This is not something that I'm doing to pump some brand. This is literally pure fragrance enthusiast content. And what we're going to compare is vintage Cuir de Russie, which is one of my favorite fragrances of all time. This is an 80s EDT bottle that is very hard to track down. This fragrance came out in 1924 or 1927, depending on which form of history you read. And we are going to compare that to Roja's Great Britain, which is also a Russian leather. Cuir de Russie literally translates to Russian leather. And I'm going to try to talk about the history. I'm going to take my time with this. This is going to take probably a little longer than your average comparison video because I want to take you through the history of Russian leather. As you know, I'm a leather lover. So leather is a very easy sell for me. Maybe one of the easiest sales. It's one of my favorite forms of perfumery, but Russian leather is special. I have some examples from my collection I've never shown you guys before. I am very experienced with Russian leathers. I love Russian leathers. Basically, in a nutshell, Russian leather utilizes the note of birch very heavily, that birch tar note, and there's a reason for that. So I went through the internet. And, you know, before we get into the differences between Great Britain and Cuir de Russie, I just want to run through the history of Russian leathers. I found some very interesting information. So first of all, at first I thought this was the first Russian leather that came out in 1924 or 1927. But actually, Amy Guerlain put out a Guerlain fragrance from 1872 that was actually called Cuir de Russie. So this is Chanel's first Russian leather, but Guerlain previously had a Cuir de Russie. And it was created for Coco Chanel. This was created for Coco Chanel by Ernst Beau, who obviously is the master perfumer that gave us number 5 and all this other stuff. And what's interesting is Coco had a very passionate affair with a Russian Grand Duke, whose name was Dmitry Pavlovich Romanov, who was cousin to the Tsar that, you know, got his head chopped off basically in the Commie Revolution. And so at the time, this was almost like a bottled essence of, women's rights and freeing the woman becoming more empowered. And I want to talk a little bit more about that because there's a very interesting tobacco note in this smoky tobacco note that comes out in the base with the birch tar. This is one of my favorite fragrances of all time. I could probably talk about this fragrance for days, but just something that I was thinking about while I was thinking how to put this video together is in the early 1920s, there was another fragrance that came out related to women's smoking called Habanita. By Molinar. This is my favorite Molinar fragrance by far. This is the vintage EDT, which they don't make anymore. This is from 1921, so we're still talking the 1920s. We're talking, these were both originally women's perfumes, although they're completely unisex now, and they both have this almost forbidden tobacco. Imagine, those long cigarette holders with the gold or silver stem, and it was like a posh statement back then. That's what I think about when I think about the tobacco in these fragrances. But let's go back to the history of Cuir de Russie. So the Russian Empire basically started this, and it was a secretive process in the late 1600s, early 1700s. It came about that they started making this Russian leather, and it became so popular that demand outweighed supply. So what they did is they started importing cow hides and horse hides and reindeer hides, and they finished the process in Russia. And while it was being created, it was a very rotten smell, because what they would do is they would apply animal urine and feces and cure it in this birch tar. And it was later on perfumers that would, of course, add the musks and civet and ambergris and stuff like that to create the compositions we know as Cuir de Russie. Now, there was also Spanish leather, which they went in a completely different category. They used rose oil and neroli and sandalwood and spices, so it was much more feminine and much less abrasive. This was supposed to be in your face and shocking, and I love that about this. And then there was also English leather, which is like cleaner, soapier, lavender, bergamot, rosemary, that kind of stuff. So the big differentiating factor is that Russian leather used this birch oil. And what they would do is they would basically rub it into the animal skin after tanning it to make it more flexible, more malleable, and to make it last longer, make it waterproof and stuff like that. So it had this intense and relentless smokiness from the birch tar oil that most leather scents just could not compete with. And it gave it that characteristic smell. And basically what they do is, if you've ever seen a birch tree, the bark actually peels off in these papery strips. And what they would do is they would soak it in this mixture of alcohol until it formed this like liqueur. And whenever it would evaporate, it would leave behind this oil type thing. And that was the chemical structure that they would actually use to soak the hides. And the chemical structure contained high levels of methyl salicate. I think I said that right. I may have butchered that. Methyl salicate, which is commonly known as like this wintergreen oil smell. So when you smell this, or when you smell any of the Russian leathers, oh God, it's so good. If you get this, you know, camphorous type quality that you know, if you ever put that wintergreen mint in your mouth, it gives it kind of that, you know, foresty, camphorous type quality on top of all the other beautiful, smoky, leathery aspects to this fragrance. The Russian soldiers actually pre-communist revolution would carry birch tar with them whenever they went on marches. They were notorious for carrying this birch tar, and it was made from birch bark heated in airtight containers, and it would leave this residue of tar and ash behind, and they would buff it onto the boots that were already cured in this process I was telling you about, so it would give it this sheen. But whenever they were marching through the snow or anything like that, you know, their boots were well known to last longer than average. There was even a story, I wonder if I can find it real quick. I read it earlier, and I was just going to try to read it to you about a ship that sunk. It set sail from Russia in 1786, and it was supposed to be from St. Petersburg to Genoa. And it hit some sort of storm, and they sought shelter off Plymouth South, Devon. And so long story short is the ship sunk. 200 years later, the ship was found, and the hides that were inside of that ship were still almost pristine because they had gone through this, you know, 17th century Russian leather process. And so the process again was like mixed tree barks, the birch with the willow bark, and they would tan it over a long stretch, and it made it strength. It made it add strength. It made it water resistant, and it would also make it almost like insect repellent. And so it was very sought after, is what I'm getting at. It was a process that was also very heavily guarded. People tried to find the secret to Russian leather. One of the things that they did that was distinct too is they used crosshatch lines on the skin. And so it made it much tougher and longer lasting. And some say that even helped get the birch tar oil deeper into the leathers with this crosshatch style. So it's a very interesting story I love Russian leathers. I'll show you a couple that I have here. One is one of the oldest perfume brands in the world, and this is a fragrance from a house known as Farina, and this is a fragrance called Kolnish Yukten. And this is one of the best Russian leather fragrances I've ever smelled. This is a very old house. I actually heard a story of Pierre Bourdon talking about trying to recreate Farina fragrances when he was an apprentice, to recreate these in a cheaper way, and he could never do it. This is such a good Russian leather fragrance. The birch in this is outstanding. It's very hard to find, by the way. I bought a partial bottle. I'm just happy to have what I have. You can look this up. You can find it occasionally. Let's see if it's in Fragrantica. Yes, it is. So if you just look up Farina Kolnish, you'll see the original. The original bottle was there's a black version and there's a see-through version like this. I don't think it matters what you get. This is basically just Russian leather, smoke, birch, olibanum, musk, and costus. And then another Russian leather that I have that I wanted to show you guys here is a fragrance that I got for one of the best prices ever. I almost stole this perfume, and it's such a deal. They're selling for hundreds of dollars now on eBay, but this is a fragrance that was created in the 1970s. Remember, the Russian leather trend really kicked in the United States in the 50s, 60s, and these little small companies popped up to make Russian leather. And one of the companies that made a Russian leather was called Cosmetco. And let's see if I can get it out of here now. All right, it's not coming out. I'll have to mess with that later. Gotta get some pliers or something. So it's stuck in this little plastic piece that it came in. But you can still see the information right there. It says Cosmetco down below. And Del Oro Russian Leather 2 Cologne. And this, I basically got in a estate sale. Someone's uncle had passed away, and the guy who inherited it didn't really care about, you know, perfumes or whatever it was, and so he sold this to me for like $10. And I jumped all over this, and very happy to have it. It's another example. This little Cosmetco was a California-based company, a Long Beach, California-based company in the 1970s. And they specialized in Russian leather. I gotta get some pliers to get this out. They also made like soaps and a bunch of other things like that. And so anyways, long story short is you can see I'm a fan of Russian leathers. I've hunted some down and, you know, I enjoy wearing them. They're very different because of that smoky birch tar type of cord. So let's get to the comparison. I've kind of rambled on long enough. So on this hand, I've got Cuir de Russie. They're both about 6-hour dry downs. So I've got the Chanel Cuir de Russie on this hand. And again, I'm not tooting my own horn here, but I'm saying there's very few people that probably have the juice to be able to do a comparison like this. This is a $2,000 fragrance for 100 ml. This is almost impossible to find. This is the EDT, by the way. Whenever they put this in the less exclusives, they initially had it as an EDT. They then switched it over to an EDP, which there are some differences. So my good friend Rich Mitch, my long-lost brother from another mother in the fragrance community, I sent him a sample of this. I sent him 2 ml, which kind of hurt my heart because this is one of my most prized possessions, but I felt like I owed it to him and I wanted to get his opinion on it anyways. And he smelled it, and he has the less exclusives EDT, and he said that this is much less floral. It is the animalics and the leather are much more amped up on this compared to his EDT. And then the EDP, apparently the florals are even more amped up, and Chanel kind of used, I think, a little different base to kind of get to where it was supposed to go. So this is a very special fragrance. So that's why I say the juices on these are, you're not going to find just an average person comparing these two fragrances. And the reason that the comparison is happening is because Roja Dove is well known for taking fragrances that are famous from the past and making new versions with better materials that you know, some people consider him to be a clone house almost. He takes versions, better materials, and, you know, sells them for exorbitant prices. $2,000 for 100 ml of this is exorbitant, no matter what you want to say about it. And this is one of my favorite Haut Luxe. I will tell you right off the bat, this is one of my favorite Haut Luxe I've ever gotten my nose on. It's better than Roja's Haut Luxe, the one that sells for $3,500 a bottle. It's better than the Majestic Oud, which also, all the ones that had the purple cap, basically, are in that Haut Luxe collection. And this is my favorite of the bunch, hands down. But I'm a leather lover, so that's kind of to be expected. So this is the reason this video is so important. You know, he took Heritage and he created Danger, right? He took Mitsuko and he created Diaghilev. And granted, I prefer Diaghilev over Mitsuko, but we're talking a price difference of more than times 10. So that's why this is such a big deal, because obviously, now one other thing I should mention too is that Cuir de Russie, if you want to call it that, this Russian leather, it cannot be copyrighted. You know, Russian leather is seen as, you know, something that brands cannot copyright. That's why you can have, you know, Russian leather, you can have Russian leather, you can have Russian leather, you can have Russian leather. So all these brands are putting out their own types of Russian leather because the name itself cannot be copyrighted. And so that is an interesting take. So obviously this is a Russian leather. Roja says it's a Russian leather, but is it inspired by Chanel? How close are they? So let me tell you kind of how these open. So when you first spray these two fragrances, again, Roja on the left hand, Chanel on the right hand, the Roja starts out very floral and way more floral than the Chanel. And the number one flower that you get in the Roja initially, when you first spray, is you get a big iris note. So we're talking the first 30 seconds to a minute, huge iris. And it reminds me more of this fragrance in the very beginning, Cuir from Dior. And this fragrance was created by Francois Demachy, and it's supposed to smell like a woman's handbag, basically. But this came out in 2014. And it's basically a iris, leather, birch. So it's basically a Russian leather, even though they don't call it that. But when you first spray Great Britain, you will be reminded of Cuir, to me, the closest. Not as close to the Chanel. The Chanel starts right out of the gate like a fighter jet. Bam, it hits you. There's no playing around. It's strong leather. It's animalic. It has those beautiful Chanel aldehydes in the top. So whenever you spray both and compare them, in the beginning, they seem like they have nothing to do with each other. But that story very quickly changes as the minutes start to go by. This starts out, the Roja starts out more oily, and the Chanel starts out dry, almost this aromatic, dry airiness, but in a heavy leather fragrance, which you wouldn't really expect. There is clary sage and orange blossom bergamot in the top here. And then you have this beautiful floral heart with vetiver, which is a very manly note. So you have this beautiful floral heart. And this instantly feels much more vintage. This feels much more modern. The Roja feels much more modern. The Chanel feels much more vintage for some reason. The Chanel reminds me of Anastasia in her palace in the early 1900s before the Russian Revolution. Now, whether I am influenced by the verbiage because I know the story, I don't know, but I instantly thought about that even the first time I wore it. It reminds me of 100 years ago, old world, beautiful ballrooms, fancy gowns. You know, it reminds me of, getting into a horse-drawn carriage. Literally, that is what this gives me, the EDT. This is one of my favorite fragrances of all time. The animalics here smell like they're from another world. They smell like they're from another time. They don't smell like modern civet. They don't smell like modern castoreum or hyrax or anything. There is this undertone. So there is this undertone of horse stables. I would say this has some animalic touches to it. So does this. But the modern Roja's animalic touches, they feel like modern castoreum and modern civet, if you will, which makes sense. It's a modern creation, and you know, this is not made for somebody's nose 100 years ago. Also, with Great Britain, I've talked about this before, and I think what the Roja Dove perfumers have done, and this is just my opinion, I could be wrong. Maybe Roja's the best perfumer in the world, but there's this, you know, thing that follows him that says he's not a perfumer. There are other people making his perfumes. He's just kind of a figurehead for the brand. So whatever you believe, you believe. Don't sue me, Roja Dove. I love you, obviously. I'm buying your stuff. But I think what the perfumers who have made this fragrance have done is they've created like a DNA for Roja. And Roja's DNA is this very specific floral heart with the violet really amped up. I've noticed that among a lot of his fragrances. The violet is amped up, and it really shows through here. Big violet note in the floral heart. But it feels like a floral heart that you've smelled in other fragrances, especially in this purple cap line. So, for example, I mentioned Majestic Oud. Oud, he calls it, Majestic Oud. It has that exact same violet heavy floral mid. It's just done with oud in the base. This is done with that leather, labdanum, oak moss, orris, there's ambergris, there's cedar, there's tolu balsam, there's carrot seeds here, which make it even more powdery. There's no iris note, by the way. There is carrot seed, though, which can imitate iris. It has this powdery iris feel, but it's not iris. Whereas this, you definitely get this iris type feel, but it's way in the background. It's behind all of the, it's behind the leather and the tobacco. By the way, this has tobacco. Like I was saying, the Habanita was a popular women's fragrance at that time. And the tobacco here is missing from the Roja Dove. There is no tobacco in the Roja. But it is a little bit animalic. Now, also, when you look at the note tree, there's almost no animalics listed other than the ambergris, which can become animalic in some way, and styrax, which I guess can become animalic. But to me, I get a big castoreum note in the orris, or in the Roja, in the dry down. Big castoreum, modern castoreum note. Almost the same modern castoreum note that I get in Promise in the late dry down. They're nothing alike. Please don't take this as saying this smells like Promise, because they are completely different. But if you just isolate the modern castoreum note that Frederic Malle is using and the modern castoreum note that Roja is using, they remind me of each other. I don't get that reminder in the Chanel. I get almost like a fragrance from another time. The Chanel, the leather and the birch and the tobacco and the heavier aromatic notes, like the clary sage, if you will, push itself to the front. There's also this heliotrope note here, which normally Roja loves, and you get a lot of heliotrope in his fragrances, but it's missing here. In the Chanel, you get this heliotrope, but it doesn't take over the composition like it does in so many other formulas where you see heliotrope used. So the Roja is more oily. The Chanel is more dry. The animalics in the Roja, by the way, don't really kick in. I mentioned when it starts to feel like Cuir, the Roja, for the first 30 minutes or so. Well, for the first 5 minutes for sure, and then it really starts to change. But the animalics don't join the party on the Roja until I would say probably the 30-minute mark. Once the 30-minute mark hits, the animalics really start to kick in. As you can see, I love both fragrances. So this is a comparison between two different fragrances, but Roja, Great Britain, is widely compared to Cuir de Russie. It's also widely compared to Cuir Canage, and I get the comparisons, but when you smell them side by side, you really can tell that they are different. But I'm finding that I'm really enjoying the Roja, and because of the way that this is made, the Roja is made, you really can sense parts of Cuir de Russie that maybe just wearing this alone, you never would be able to sense how dry this is. You never would be able to sense, the tobacco making a big impression in the base. The leather and the birch coming forward so much more than here. I feel like you could wear this almost anywhere. Now, both of these fragrances are high-class fragrances. They're not meant to be worn in a t-shirt like I'm wearing today. They're meant to be worn in a tuxedo to a fancy event. I mean, this is what this is made for. If I ever had to put on a tuxedo and go to a ball, you bet your bottom dollar this is what I'm wearing. Or now this, it just depends on the mood. But if price was no issue, I would buy 100 ml of this. But I am not spending $2,000 on 100 ml of Roja's Great Britain. That being said, as a leather lover, these little 7.5 ml Discovery atomizers are beautiful, and I'm very glad to have it, and I'm very glad to have been able to, do this comparison. The Russian leathers are supposed to kind of have this mellow and warm and soothing part to it, and it really is something. You feel like you're entering a different time when you wear a Russian leather. No one makes Russian leathers anymore. This is from 1970. This is from, I don't even know when this is from. This is from like 100 years ago or something. I don't know when the Farina was made, but I know it was made a long, long time ago. And that birch tar with the leather, I just absolutely love it. I don't love it all the time. I don't want to wear it all the time is what I mean. I love it all the time, but I don't necessarily want to wear it all the time because you really have to be in the mood to wear Russian leather. It is something very posh. Both of these fragrances are so aristocratic. Both of these are very aristocratic fragrances. You feel like you're in the 1920s with Anastasia with this one, and this, you just feel like you're, wearing a very modern Russian leather to me. So, I really can't give much more than that. Those are my thoughts. I've kind of rambled on for 30 minutes, but I hope I did a good job explaining what a Russian leather is, because it's so important in understanding the composition and what you're smelling and how it came to be. But both of these, if you can find, this bottle's probably going to be impossible for you to find. But if you can find the EDT, it's apparently supposed to be closer to this version than the EDP. The EDP has its florals amped up, which this also has its florals amped up. But then you get this very modern, animalics in the base. And there is an ambrette note, by the way, which comes from a plant, but is supposed to replicate this musk. And that might be where the animalics are coming from here. Could be a little bit of that labdanum with the ambrette and the ambergris. But you can tell this is a very high quality fragrance. My favorite from the Purple Cap line so far, hands down, not even close. If I had to buy one other Roja, this is the one that I would want to buy a full bottle of. But I just don't know if, can this compete with this? Just off of initial impression, I would say no. I would say nothing can replicate this. This is the best Russian leather fragrance, in my opinion, hands down. Just because of the way that it is so transportative. It takes me back to that. It takes me back to Chanel having an affair with the Archduke. I mean, literally, it transports me in a way very few fragrances do. And that's why, for me, I think this is Ernst Beau's masterpiece, not Chanel No. 5. I think it's this. There are some, I heard Eugene once say that you get little pieces of Chanel No. 5 in here. I kind of understand what he's saying, but I don't enjoy No. 5 as when I wear it. I love wearing this one. So that's kind of my comparison. I know this is kind of real nerd YouTube fragrance talk here. The average person isn't going to care about a discontinued Chanel that you can't find versus a $2,000 Roja. But, here we are. This is my channel and my fragrance journey, and I'll talk about what I want to talk about. And I hope people enjoy it, but if you don't, too bad. I bought these with my own money, and that's that. So, give me your thoughts below. Let me know if you've kind of smelled both of these or either of these, or if you like Russian leathers, or if there's some Russian leathers out there that you think I should try. I'm always open to new ideas, and I'm always open to, hearing about new brands and stuff like that. But if you can find stuff like this out there for cheap, like I got this for $10, $12, whatever it was a steal. And this I paid a little bit more for, but if you're really into Russian leathers, this is one of the best on the market right there with Chanel. Check these out. So I hope you've enjoyed this comparison. I've got a lot of first impressions coming from D.L. Qualia's samples and Rich Mitch's samples. So I've got a lot of content that I want to upload, but I want to thank you for watching, and cheers, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.